There is a voice inside every fear that sounds much louder than it actually is. You have heard it before. The voice that tells you the thing ahead of you is too large, too powerful, too beyond anything you could possibly handle. The voice that arrives not as a whisper, but as a thunder filling every corner of the space inside you, leaving no room for the quieter thought that might ask, "But have you actually looked?" This is a story about that voice, and about the one creature brave enough to look. The cave. In a forest of green hills and old trees, there was a rabbit who was known for one thing above all else. Not his speed, though he was quick. Not his cleverness, though he was observant. He was known for his kindness, the particular kindness of a creature who shows up when others are struggling and does not make a performance of the showing up. He had sat with the deer through a long illness. He had helped the squirrel find her buried acorns after the flood rearranged the ground. He had carried water to the old badger when the badger's legs stopped cooperating with the rest of him. The forest knew him, and the forest, in its way, loved him for it. On the morning, everything changed. The rabbit was simply looking for breakfast. He had been eating leaves for so long that the word leaf had begun to feel like a small punishment. What he had wanted for weeks, was a carrot. Just one, the orange weight of it in his paws, the particular crunch, the sweetness that leaves, however nutritious, have never once pretended to offer. And that morning, against all reasonable expectation, he found one. It was sitting in a patch of sunlight between two roots, looking exactly as a carrot should look, as if it had been placed there specifically for him, which of course it hadn't been, but joy has a way of arranging facts in its own favor. He picked it up. He held it. He decided, because he was a creature who believed in savoring things properly, to carry it home to his cave and eat it there, in peace, with nothing to interrupt the experience. This decision, as small decisions sometimes do, changed everything. He was thinking about the carrot when he slipped. The riverbank was wet from the night's rain, and his attention was entirely elsewhere, and the ground simply disappeared from beneath his back foot in the way that ground does when you stop respecting it. He grabbed a tree root with both front paws and hung there for a moment over the rushing water, his heart doing things hearts are not supposed to do, and then he scrambled back to solid ground and sat very still, breathing. The carrot was gone. He watched it travel the current spinning once, catching briefly on a stone, then releasing, and then it went over the waterfall. And that was the end of the carrot and the beginning of a different kind of morning. He sat by the river for a while, not searching, just sitting. The kind of sitting that happens when a small loss arrives on top of an already difficult day and the body decides that stillness is the only reasonable response. Eventually, he turned back toward home. He smelled it before he heard it. Something in the air near his cave that was not the usual smell of his cave, not the familiar combination of earth and old leaves, and the particular mustiness of a space that belongs to someone, something else. Something that had been somewhere he had not been. He stopped at the cave entrance. His heart, which had only recently recovered from the riverbank, began its irregular behavior again. "Who is in there?" he called. His voice came out smaller than he intended, the voice of someone who is hoping they are wrong about what they already know. Silence. Then, from deep within the cave, filling the space completely, bouncing off every wall and returning amplified and strange and enormous a voice. "I am the one who breaks a rhinoceros's bones. I am the one who crushes an elephant into dust. I have come from the deep places, and I do not leave what I have claimed." The rabbit sat down on the ground because his legs stopped being available for standing. He found the wolf on the forest path, moving with the easy confidence of a creature who has never had a reason to doubt himself. "I have a problem," the rabbit said, and he explained. The wolf's chest expanded slightly, the way chests do when they are preparing to demonstrate something about themselves. "Leave it to me," he said. "Every animal in this forest knows my voice." He did, to be fair, have an impressive voice. The growl he produced at the cave entrance was the kind of growl that reorganizes the thoughts of anything within hearing distance. But the voice from the cave was not reorganized. It returned, larger than before, filling the morning with its impossible dimensions. I break rhinoceros bones. I crush elephants. What are you to me? The wolf's growl stopped. He stood very still for a moment, like an animal recalculating something important. Then he turned and walked quickly into the undergrowth, and the rabble noticed that the walking was at a pace just below the pace that would be described as running, as if the wolf understood that running would have said something definitive about the situation, and he preferred to keep things ambiguous. The tiger came next, because the rabbit asked, and because the tiger remembered a morning when the rabbit had sat with him through an injury and never mentioned it to anyone afterward. The tiger's roar was genuinely extraordinary. It was the kind of sound that reminded the forest what forests are for, not the gentle pastoral version of nature, but the other version, the one with teeth and consequence. The cave received the roar, processed it through its acoustic architecture, and returned something that made the tiger's roar sound like a preliminary announcement. The tiger stood at the cave mouth and experienced, for perhaps the first time in his life, the specific sensation of his own power feeling insufficient. He left, not running exactly, but with a speed that suggested he had remembered an urgent appointment elsewhere. The rhinoceros came because word had traveled and because the rhinoceros had something to prove about the honor of his species. The elephant came because the elephant had never run from anything and wasn't planning to start. Both of them left. The rabbit sat outside his cave and watched the largest, most powerful creatures in the forest retreat from a voice, and felt the particular loneliness of someone who has asked for help and discovered that help has its limits. The frog arrived without being invited. He was small, the kind of small that becomes invisible in large company, and he sat beside the rabbit with the unhurried ease of a creature that had nowhere more important to be. "I heard what happened," the frog said. "Shall I try?" The rabbit looked at him. He thought about the wolf, the tiger, the rhinoceros, the elephant. He thought about the voice from inside the cave and what it had done to each of them. "I don't think," he began. "That's fine," the frog said pleasantly. "You don't have to think it will work. I just want to try." There was something in this that stopped the rabbit from saying more. Not hope exactly, but something that hope is made from the willingness to allow for the possibility of being wrong about what is impossible. He watched the frog hop toward the cave entrance. The other animals had been watching from the trees and undergrowth, the wolf and the tiger and the rhinoceros and the elephant, none of them willing to admit they had come back to see, all of them present nonetheless. The frog called into the darkness. "Who is in there?" The voice came, enormous and filling, and certain of its own power. "I break rhinoceros bones. I crush." "Come out," the frog said, not loudly, not with the aggression of the wolf's growl or the force of the tiger's roar, just a clear, simple, direct instruction from a creature that had decided to find out rather than imagine. The voice hesitated, and in the hesitation, something shifted. Because the thing making the voice had been operating on an assumption that the announcing of itself would be enough, that the sound would do the work that presence would have to do if challenged directly. And now it was being challenged directly by something small and unbothered, and it didn't know what to do with that. A shadow appeared at the cave entrance, small, hesitant, moving with the particular caution of something that is no longer sure of its own authority. And then, into the morning light, crept a caterpillar. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that forms when a large group of creatures is simultaneously processing the difference between what they feared and what was actually there. The caterpillar looked at the assembled animals. The assembled animals looked at the caterpillar. Then, starting with the rabbit, spreading to the wolf, finding the tiger, reaching even the dignified elephant, laughter moved through the forest like a second kind of echo, warmer than the first. Not cruel laughter, the laughter of recognition, of creatures who had all just learned the same thing about themselves at the same time. The caterpillar had not meant to terrify anyone. This matters, and deserves to be said clearly. The caterpillar was not a villain. It was a small creature that had found an empty cave and moved in, and when called out, had said the only thing it knew how to say, a kind of reflexive self-defense, a puffing up that the cave had amplified beyond anything the caterpillar had intended or imagined. The voice that broke rhinoceros bones was a tiny creature trying to feel safe. Every enormous fear, when you walk toward it rather than away from it, turns out to have something like this at its center. Not nothing, the caterpillar was real, the voice was real, the echo was real. But the gap between what it sounded like and what it actually was, that gap, was made entirely of imagination and distance. The wolf had made that gap larger by stepping back. The tiger had made it larger still. The rhinoceros and the elephant had made it so large that by the time the frog arrived, the cave was practically its own mythology. The frog had simply refused to add to it. Not because the frog was braver than a tiger or stronger than a rhinoceros, but because the frog had decided that knowing was better than imagining, and the only way to know was to go closer rather than farther away. Later, when the animals had dispersed and the rabbit was back in his cave, which smelled like himself again, which felt like his again, he thought about the carrot. He had been so focused on the carrot that he had slipped. He had been so devastated by losing the carrot that he had walked home without paying attention. He had arrived at the cave already depleted, already frightened before the frightening thing even happened, already running on empty. And then the voice had found him in that state and filled all the empty space. He thought about how different the morning might have been if he had not been depleted, or if his first response to the voice had been curiosity rather than terror, or if, like the frog, he had simply walked toward the thing instead of away from it. He thought, the cave has been mine for years, the voice was new, and I let the new thing undo everything the familiar thing should have told me. I knew this cave. I knew every sound it makes. I should have known that a voice that large in a space that small was an echo, not a creature. I ran from a carrot that fell in a river. And then I ran from an echo, and in between, I forgot who I was. The frog visited him the next morning. They sat at the cave entrance and watched the forest begin its day. And after a while, the rabbit asked, "Were you afraid?" The frog thought about this honestly. "Yes," he said. "I was afraid." "Then how did you—" "I decided that being afraid of the unknown was worse than knowing the thing I was afraid of." A pause. "I thought, if I go closer, and it really is something terrible, I will at least know what I am dealing with. And if it isn't, I will have given everyone their morning back." He looked at the rabbit. "Either way, I preferred knowing." The rabbit sat with this for a long time. Either way, I preferred knowing. It was such a simple thing, and it had done what the tiger's roar and the rhinoceros's fury and the elephant's bulk could not do. Because all of those things were strength directed outward, strength performing itself, strength trying to overwhelm the unknown rather than illuminate it. The frog had not performed strength. He had simply moved toward the truth. There is a voice inside every fear that sounds much louder than it actually is. The wolf knew this now. The tiger knew it. The rhinoceros and the elephant, in the privacy of their own thoughts, had stopped being quite so certain of their own invulnerability. And the rabbit sitting in the cave that was his again, in the morning that belonged to everyone, understood something he had not understood before. The problems we avoid do not wait patiently for us to feel ready. They sit in our caves and practice their echoes. They learn the acoustics of our avoidance. They grow, not because they are growing, but because the distance we put between ourselves and them gives them room to expand in our imaginations until they fill every space available. The wolf made it bigger by stepping back. We all make it bigger by stepping back. The only thing that makes it smaller is the frog's simple, unheroic, completely available to anyone decision. I prefer knowing. Walk toward it. Not because you are certain you will survive the encounter, not because you have been promised a good outcome, but because the not knowing, the imagining, the echo that fills the cave of your avoidance that costs more than the knowing ever will, and more often than not, when you finally see it in the light, you will find a caterpillar, small, frightened, doing the best it can with a very big echo, not nothing, but not what the fear said it was. Never quite what the fear said it was.